Semiconductor technology has been one of the key growth drivers of global economic growth. Look at the rise of Korea, the rise of Taiwan, and the U.S. obviously has been the gold standard in this. I joined in July of 2016, and I told the board I believe Marvell, with the right M&A strategy, could transform itself to be a leading provider of data infrastructure opportunity. It's really important in semiconductor companies what your end market exposure is, because the end market ultimately is what's going to determine your success. We got to 2020, 2021, AI literally became the ultimate killer data infrastructure app. Moving data, storing data, processing data, securing. It's what the whole thing is run on in terms of the complexity of the systems. And then boom, when this all changed, our business just rocketed.
Welcome to Grit. I'm Jubin, partner at Kleiner Perkins, a show where we go beyond the highlight reel and explore the personal and professional challenges of building history-making companies. Today on Grit, we have Matt Murphy, chairman and CEO of Marvell Technologies. Since stepping in as CEO in 2016, Matt has led a full transformation, turning Marvell into a leader in data infrastructure and semiconductors, powering this wave of AI, cloud, 5G, and more. Before Marvell, he spent 2 decades at Maxim, rising through product sales and strategy roles. Matt shares what it takes to lead through major shifts of computing. The next upcoming one that we're in the midst of today is the artificial intelligence wave. Enjoy the episode. You're in the eye of the hurricane right now.
Yeah.
Aren't you?
I think in a lot of ways.
Don't you think?
A lot of ways, yeah, for sure.
You're in it. You're in it.
Right in the middle of it.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing this.
Yeah,
It's really fun.
Yeah.
When I was reading about your business and studying more about like you and what you all are doing,
Right.
it was even more striking how much in the heart of the action you really are.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of under the radar in the action, wouldn't you say?
Correct. Yeah. I think from a broad public perspective, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, friends of mine, family, like nobody understands this
Yeah,
stuff.
you're like
But-
in IT.
But we're 80% of our revenue next year is going to be like data center and AI, and that concentration from a semiconductor perspective, or actually any supplier, if you think about it, into that sort of ecosystem, it's us and NVIDIA in terms of the biggest exposure,
Yeah.
leverage to it,
Yeah.
which is good and bad, right? Because you get a little more volatility, but it's pretty incredible, especially since we'll talk about, you probably read about, we didn't start off this way.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, we didn't have all these assets.
Yeah.
In this position.
It's crazy.
And we supply to everybody. You know, we're Switzerland.
Still do.
Yeah.
Still do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was doing the like stock math of what happened to your company since you joined.
Uh-huh.
Can I just like read it back to you
sure.
and get your reaction to it? 'Cause
Sure.
I think it's insane.
Yeah.
$9 a share was Marvell's stock price when you joined, right?
Yep.
And that was, I'm just looking here, 2016.
Yep.
10 years ago, call it.
Yep.
In January of this year, it was at $124 a share.
Right.
It was a $100 billion company, like 3 months ago. $100 billion company.
Right. Right. Right.
A huge company.
It's big. And actually, when I started in July of 2016, even more remarkable is the actual firm enterprise value
Yeah.
was only $3.5 billion, because the company had like $1.6 billion of cash. So the market cap was like $5 billion,
Yeah.
no debt.
Yeah.
So really firm value was 3.5. And then, you know, like you said, just before all this stuff happened, it was $100 billion plus, you know, call it $4 billion of debt. So at some point it was like $110 billion if you took the full like sort of swing
In
9 years.
In 9
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
you like 10x the stock.
Yeah.
Then in 2024, the stock appreciated 83%
Right.
in a year.
Right. Yeah. It was a strong performer
Like in a
24.
year.
Yeah.
You go on Jim Cramer, you're doing the victory laps. Jim Cramer is giving you the like flowers. This is a buy, you know, the whole deal.
Right.
And this last quarter, over the last couple of months, you beat plan.
Yep.
Your best quarter ever as a business. And as of today, you're down to $50 a share. It's like a $50 billion market cap company.
Yeah.
From $100 billion like a
Right.
few months ago.
Yeah, pretty
After
quick.
having your best performance ever.
Right. And guiding the best quarter in the history of the company.
And forward guiding the best,
Right.
the best quarter in the history of the
That's
company.
right.
What the hell?
Yeah. You got to take the long view.
I mean,
You know, we've had periods over the last 9 years of a lot of volatility, you know, and we've always just powered through. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. So, you know, the semiconductor business, you have to look way through any kind of cycle in terms of your investment profile. And, you know, the stuff we're working on today, decisions we make like right now, it's really not going to generate meaningful revenue until 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now. And so multiples are going to go up and down. You know, semiconductors is inherently a cyclical business. It always has been. If anyone ever tells you at some point that, hey, the good news is it's structurally so much better now and it won't be as cyclical.
it's not.
It's not. I mean, everybody says that in periods between huge cyclicality. But, you know, I'm like 31 years doing this.
Yeah.
And so I've seen all the cycles.
In the semi industry.
In semis, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So since 1995 was the first big semi up cycle,
Yep.
followed by a massive crash in 1996, actually.
Yeah.
Huge reset. But nobody remembers that. All you remember is like the point from like early 90s to 99, 2000, and it was just all up and to the right.
Yeah.
But in between, you had a 96 reset. There was a 1998. There was this Asian contagion. You know, the tiger countries had a structural crisis in their economies, big downturn in the industry. Nobody remembers this stuff. And equity values moved all around. But I just always look at it like you gotta look at where your total opportunity is. You have to stay very committed to your R&D and to your programs. You have to have a lot of conviction. And if you make the right bets, which you don't know and this comes back to the sort of grit concept, maybe you'll ask me about, but you got to be super gritty to be in this industry because you have to have very strong conviction in what you're doing with little to no positive feedback or reinforcement along the way, other than like customer input and things like that. But, you know, the external world, they can't see it, right? Until the stuff, you know, the things you conceive about what you can do in terms of products go through their development cycle, come out the other side.
You're saying because the life cycle from conception to development to coming out the other side is like 5 years.
Yeah, being very realistic, right? I mean, let's say we engage in a new concept right now, some new type of chip. And this could be Marvell, could have been my old company, could be anywhere. And, you know, you might spend like 6 months, you know, vetting the idea, coming up with a product definition, getting some customer sponsorship. At some point you do your financial analysis. Does this thing meet my ROI hurdles and so forth? What's the risk? How do you, and then so you commit this project. And typical IC development cycle times are 18 to 36 months, right? In terms of just a whole team working on a chip. Once the product is out, especially now on these advanced technology nodes that are using these advanced process technology, you know, enhancements we've seen like FinFET and gate all around, you end up with so much complexity that the process, the wafer fab cycle times are like 6 months. Okay, just from when you put it in the fab to you get it out, and then you got to package it, test it. So you're just looking at like even from when you think you're done and you've like taped out the chip to TSMC or your foundry of choice, you're waiting like 6 months to 9 months to even know if it works. And then assuming it works, you got to go get it in your customer hands. Then they have to go through a qualification cycle. Even if they're jamming, that could take like in a hyperscale cloud account, that could take like a year sometimes. So, I mean, if you think about the kind of resilience you need to have to sort of just stick by what you're doing with economic cycles moving around on you. And
it reminds me of the feedback loops of early stage venture capital, where you make a bet, you make a bunch of bets, you have no idea for 5 years,
right,
at least,
right,
if the bets are good or if you're good,
right. I mean, you can checkpoint them, you can status them, right? You can milestone it.
You can markups.
You can, yeah, exactly. You can sort of look at that, but and you know, and I mean, like when I took the job at Marvell, my concept really coming in, and I had sort of gotten religion on this even when I was at Maxim in my later years. But I told the board when I was interviewing, I said, you know, my view is my number one job is capital allocation. That's my number one job. And, and because getting these bets correct on where you deploy your most precious resource, which is in a semiconductor company, is your R&D expense, your new product development expense. And given that you don't have a lot of flexibility once you commit to these, you got to get it right. Like that, that whole concept is so critical because you steer it the wrong way. And once it's steered the wrong way, it's really hard to turn the ship.
And by the way, similar to venture capital, you kind of just got to get lucky. Like you got to get a nice break or two along the way.
Absolutely.
That the market also shifts in the direction that your product development is going.
100%. I mean,
like you couldn't have known when you joined in 2016 or 17 as the CEO of this company that in 5 years, we were about to see the most important technology shift that we've ever seen.
Right.
And the underpinning of that technology shift is the hardware and the chips that are powering all of these GPUs to make these models actually work because they're so hungry for power.
Right.
Like, when you joined, the reason your stock was not where it is today is because people thought that was old news.
Right.
The only people that are going to need it are the cloud service providers.
Well, let's talk about that. So I mean, when I joined the company, it's really important semiconductor companies, what your end market exposure is. In companies segment things different ways. Hey, here's my revenue by product line. Here's my revenue by geography. Here's my revenue by whatever. The biggest sort of thing you got to look at is your revenue concentration and your opportunity by end market, because the end market ultimately is what's going to determine your success. For example, by the time I became CEO, consumer electronics in general had become X unit growth. Like there's a kind of a fixed amount of smartphones that are selling every year, fixed number of PCs. That hadn't changed in forever, right? Digital still cameras, Google Chrome stick, you name it, right? And so if you're exposed to that market, then you're effectively fighting a market share battle with your competitors because the market's not growing. And maybe, what happens a lot of times is you can get content increases, so that helps. Like semiconductors, that drives a lot of the growth is you add more electronic value, and that sort of can offset a slow growth opportunity. So my view, and so at Marvell, we were like 60, 70% consumer.
When you joined?
When I joined.
Supplying iPhones, Samsung.
Yeah, we were in phones. Yeah, we were in smart TVs. We had a Wi-Fi business. I mean, I remember at one point I joined and one of the employees was really proud and posted on LinkedIn that Marvell had been selected as a supplier for the Wi-Fi chips for the latest Mattel Barbie smart house. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't think this is where the future is here. There's no cool sounding, but no value. And so then the rest of the business was really an enterprise, right? So we were selling to companies like Cisco or Juniper or others, which is a very nice end market and very sustainable, but that didn't capture what was going to happen in the cloud, what was going to happen in the transition in telecom into 5G, didn't have new growth vectors like automotive. There's other markets that were out there, but we did not have those assets to go after those. But my strong view, in joining Marvell was that from the industry perspective, that basically all the market cap in the world was going to shift to the big tech platform companies. It was already underway back then, but I don't think we understood how profound that shift was going to be relative to the market cap that was going to get ascribed to Meta and Amazon and those types of companies, and at the expense of other traditional legacy important companies. That was my first thesis. That was going to drive then the semiconductor TAM to move there, which fundamentally meant cloud computing and infrastructure, right? Being kind of the hot market that was going to require a lot of advanced silicon. And I joined in July of 2016, and I told the board in my December 2016 board meeting, so it was 5 months later, I told them that was my view, that I believe Marvell with the right M&A strategy, because we couldn't do it on our own, could transform itself to be a leading provider of what I termed at that time, I called it the data infrastructure opportunity. So shift out of the consumer, harvest it, and go after the other one. And I listed 4 companies that I thought we should acquire. I still have the slide from like that board meeting. And those 4 companies were Cavium, Inphi, Aquantia, and Mellanox. And we actually ended up acquiring 3 of the 4.
And NVIDIA bought the 4th.
And NVIDIA bought the 4th. And we did have an opportunity to participate and get to know the team. It was a great company that he bought. But
these are expensive acquisitions too.
They were. Inphi, we'll get to it. It was actually the highest multiple ever paid for a public decent asset in semiconductors. I mean, I took a huge risk on that.
It was a $10 billion buy.
$10 billion buy. It was supposed to do 840 in the year ahead of us. It had done 680 or something in terms of revenues.
Yep.
So 13 times kind of sales multiple. And what a home run. I mean, under Marvell, it's totally thrived. I mean, big round numbers, it's over tripled since we closed in 2021.
Wow. And
we turbocharged it with the Marvell assets. But same thing with Cavium. That was the first one we did. That was like $6 billion. And we paid 85% of our enterprise value to buy it.
Come on.
Yeah. And I was CEO for like 18 months. So this was like a huge bet.
And that's to make the shift to enterprise?
That was, Cavium.
To get out of consumer?
Yeah. So Cavium was a pure play. They had no consumer.
Yep.
Okay. So they were like a $800 million revenue company that was going to grow. And they were in enterprise. They were in carrier. So they had a very good position in 4G, and they were going to have a stronger position in 5G in terms of the infrastructure chips. And they had a number of emerging, very exciting technologies for cloud computing, for compute products, ARM-based microprocessors. There's an inference chip. There's a few different things they had that were in there too. So that was the way to get leverage to the cloud, leverage to the carrier, and the 5G opportunity, and then add some additional enterprise heft. And then by adding that revenue, which was 100% infrastructure and 0 consumer, and I merge it with my consumer-heavy business, it shifted the mix.
Yeah.
And I also had just one final point within that consumer. This is kind of a shocking one. Half of the company revenue, so most of that consumer business was actually in storage. We were the leading company for storage controllers for hard disk drives in notebooks. Okay, so how many notebooks today have a hard disk drive? None. Back then, it was still transitioning.
Right.
And that was actually like a big chunk of my revenue, and it was a huge portion of my operating income.
Wow.
So I knew I needed to do something, right? Because that was not going to be sustainable. I could manage it, but it certainly wasn't going to be a growth opportunity. It was going to probably shrink over time. We had a position in the SSD side also, so there was going to be some offset. But I'm like, this is not a way to grow a company, and certainly that exposure was not favorable. So when we announced the acquisition, I mean, we ended up, it was kind of incredible. Like there was a multiple mismatch. So that Cavium was trading at, say, 18, 19, 20 times forward earnings. We were trading at 12 or 13. We literally, when we announced it, it leaked first, and our stock appreciated when that happened. And then when we finally announced it, our stock ended up appreciating almost as much as the Cavium stock did. What happened is we got basically our multiple on the announcement re-rated up to their multiple.
Wow.
So all that revenue re-rated, and then we announced some pretty compelling cost synergies because there was overlap in things we were doing. And we got credit for all the synergies up front. So, by the time we did the Cavium thing, the stock was like in the low 20s, where it had been like $9. And so anyway, but that was a huge risk, as you can imagine. Like you're going to go below 85% of your company to buy something.
Yeah.
And we were able to do it and keep the debt reasonable because we had cash on the balance sheet. And And I've always maintained investment grade. Like that's like a kind of a line in the sand I drew from the very beginning. If I'm going to do an M&A strategy, I want to never get over my skis. And so, yeah, several of these were big. They were risky. They were expensive, but they turned out to be very accretive and very strategic in terms of building out this portfolio now where 95% of our revenue is infrastructure.
Yep.
And 5 is consumer.
And the bets on call it, things are moving to the cloud. The FANG stocks and Microsoft will be the beneficiaries of that. Things are moving to 5G. You make those bets, right?
Yep.
They start working. Your stock starts to reap the benefits of those bets. COVID happens, probably even furthermore accelerates
right
that path to the cloud and 5G and everything. And then all of a sudden, those seem to pale in comparison to when these large language models start to proliferate. Is that fair?
Exactly. So the way that we think about it, and again, just the final reference point back to the 2016 and that board deck with the acquisition strategy was also when I told the board, my vision for the company. And I basically said, look, we want to be the leading semiconductor company and provider of solutions that move data, store data, process data, and secure data. Do it faster, more reliably, better than anybody else. So think about that for a minute, right? And this concept we talked about. We got to 2020, 2021, and then the advent of, the sort of acceleration in AI. And it's like AI literally became the ultimate killer data infrastructure app. For sure, because you need all those things. Moving data, storing data, processing data, securing. It's what the whole thing is run on in terms of the complexity of those systems. And just, I remember we were doing due diligence on this company, on Inphi, which we acquired in 2020, and they laid it all out. I mean, they had basically gotten design wins and were in all these AI clusters with their interconnect products, and saw the whole block diagram, all the chips, the roadmap, but it wasn't that big. But it was exciting. It was kind of like a call option. And when we acquired it, most of our DCF on that company was based on their position in the traditional cloud networks, which were all transitioning to a new type of optical interface, which required this PAM4 modulation technology, which Inphi had led in. And so that's what we did the whole valuation on. And by the way, there's this AI kind of kicker if it ever really hit. That's where I was in 2020. But it wasn't an accident, in terms of how we woke. But so Inphi and then Marvell, we stayed very engaged, and then boom, when this all changed, our business just rocketed. But because we were in those designs already.
Why is the semiconductor industry? Why is Marvell? Why is NVIDIA? Why is it so important to this transition right now? Like, why has basically all of the value so far in the last 4 or 5 years, sans like maybe OpenAI, Anthropic, and a few others, basically all accrued at this layer?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. One is it's certainly, take a step all the way back, right? Fundamentally, at least for the last 30, 40 years, right? Semiconductor technology has been one of the key growth drivers, right, of global economic growth. And it's the foundation and basis for almost everything we do. And having been through all these different product cycles, there's different benefits it's brought to consumers and human beings. But in every one of those cycles, there was a huge sort of value attribution, if you will, to a certain set of companies. Like notebooks, like notebook PCs when I started in the chip industry were a luxury item. Nobody, they were very expensive, they were heavy. That trend happened hundreds of millions of notebooks started shipping. Intel benefited big time, but so did the rest of the ecosystem, the memory vendors. I was at an analog company. We were doing all the power management back then for notebooks. It helped us tremendously. And in each of these cycles, the networking wave or optical communications, the cloud computing trend, smartphones, there's always this sort of big boon that comes from that into the chip industry. The interesting thing in those prior cycles is it was very broad-based. Like almost every semiconductor company had their own angle in one of these types of applications. So think of the whole industry gets lifted. But the AI opportunity is so unique that it's a lot more value being created because the chip technology has a bigger lever on kind of the end result, which is ultimately productivity. Like I'm talking about like global productivity. And there's fewer companies that possess that unique technology. So this is not a broad-based thing. So in the AI wave, it's a big disconnect between the top 3, 4, 5 companies that are really in there and then everybody else who has some exposure to it, but it's not enough to move their needle because they're in other end markets too. And so that's coming back to my theme. I've just always believed like market always wins. Like that's what you pick, and then you put the best team together, the best products, et cetera. And so, and then if you think about the value that Gen AI is creating and where that's coming from, it is coming from the fundamental at the most basic layer, the coupling of breakthroughs in high performance computing, right, which NVIDIA has really driven, right, but now other people are also coming in with their own homegrown solutions, right, the large cloud providers, but NVIDIA pioneered all this in terms of the compute layer. But then also coupling it and going back to Mellanox, which they did very well, coupling it with the networking, the connectivity, the overall system design. And we participate in that too within their ecosystem, but also within all the other cloud providers. That is just this very complex, very kind of tightly knit, closed system that only a few companies have the basic technology to provide it all. And I think the breadth as well. So it's different than the other cycles.
I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah.
So tell me if you think I'm crazy here.
Okay.
I had John Chambers in this room like a month ago, who was the CEO of Cisco.
Of course.
And at one time in the world, they were the most valuable company. Okay. And hearing you describe the role that NVIDIA and you all play in this ecosystem really reminds me of the role that Cisco played in the days of the internet. Right? It was all the piping and plumbing.
Right.
And again, for a long time, not forever, but for a long time, the value accrued to them.
That's right.
Now I'm sitting here now like it's, middle of 2025. It's definitely different. You know what I mean? Like, because at some point, Cisco cratered like 90%.
Right.
I don't know. But like, so far, history has rhymed. And maybe this tailwind is stronger, bigger, more permanent. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, how do you forecast that?
Yeah, it's hard to forecast. Numbers are all over the map. But I think there are parallels in terms of, as there been a build out cycle and CapEx and money being spent, and then is there digestion, and then there's economic, there's a lot of factors that happen in the sort of networking boom, right, which I referred to and you kind of brought back with the Cisco story. And now we're in a AI CapEx boom right now. And at some point there'll be a digestion and there'll be some moderation like just you would normally expect. I think a couple things though that's really exciting about this one. One is, and kind of akin to the innovation that Cisco drove, it really enabled the internet to exist, right? And they drove it. And now you have companies like NVIDIA and others and the cloud companies creating their own solutions to let AI exist. The interesting one is that on the AI side, I mean, there is, and you pick your number, you guys have a number in your firm and others, but there's, I don't know, $4 or $5 trillion of productivity out there right, that AI could really go after in the world. It really could create a massive, for those that win in it, it could create massive economic opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fundamentally what this coupling of all these technologies together is enabling. From a semiconductor point of view, it's so complex now because what's happened, and this is like a profound shift that's, I think people are just starting to figure out, for the last 20 plus years, what drove Moore's Law was consumer electronics. In the 90s and early 2000s, it drove Intel's roadmap in terms of personal computing, right? That's what drove Moore's Law, bleeding edge process technology. With the advent of smartphones and sort of that whole, and just higher end feature phones and TSMC's rise, their leading edge technology was all mobile focused.
Mm-hmm.
If you look now at TSMC, the majority of their revenue is now coming from what they call HPC, high performance computing, which is this stuff, data infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And so now the bleeding edge process nodes and packaging, it's all driven by AI. And look, I've been doing this a long time. We're in this business, and we are at the bleeding edge.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not for the faint of heart.
Mm-hmm.
The moat that's created around the companies that have the right team, the right IP, the right skill set, the right scale to invest in this technology and drive the breakthroughs. There's no best practice to follow right now.
That's right. And the funny thing is,
you're just innovating. And
you don't even care, actually, who ends up, like Cisco didn't care if MySpace or Facebook was going to become the social network player.
That's right.
Cisco didn't care if Napster or Spotify was going to win, right? Cisco didn't care if Airbnb existed, you know what I mean? Or something else.
Right.
Or if it was Google or the 19 search engines before.
Right.
At some point, you're abstracted from the winners and losers.
Totally.
As long as this is as big as we all think it is.
That's right. That's right. That's the question.
Is that fair?
Absolutely. We are very agnostic to those types of things you mentioned. We supply our fundamental technology in some different forms, right? Whether it's sort of merchant products that we develop or we do a lot of custom silicon products. That all is fundamentally leveraged to the whole market opportunity, whatever model wants to run, whatever killer app wants to run, whatever the new thing in the future on the App Store that's going to be the number one app that's using generative AI and the latest models to go make something magical happen. That our view is that'll all at some point, all those little hops that go through the data center and all the process, that'll run on Marvell technology.
Or a competitor.
Yeah, we'll be part of those ecosystems. I mean, it'll all go through.
Because right now, it's Marvell and all of your competitors, and there's still not enough chips.
There's still not enough chips.
Right.
That's right.
And you've mentioned TSMC a couple of times. Can you define TSMC's role in all of this? Especially because, in the previous administration, there was the CHIPS Act. In the current administration, you all are in a very interesting geopolitical hotspot too.
Mm.
And maybe can you talk about how do you work with TSMC? Why is that so important to the work that you do? And then why does that matter to generally us as a country?
I had this belief that the U.S. semiconductor industry was critical for U.S. and I'd say Western nations at large, national and economic security, and also what has driven significant growth in economies, which has created economic opportunity for everybody, is countries that adopted and invested in leading edge technology. And you saw this, by the way, in Southeast Asia, which I'll come back to TSMC. Look at the rise of Korea, but it's on the back of semiconductor technology and consumer electronics and advanced manufacturing. The rise of Taiwan, same thing. They concluded Singapore as countries that investing in these types of advanced technologies was going to drive their economy and uplift their citizens and so forth. And the U.S. obviously has been the gold standard in this. And by the way, the leading market share in semiconductors for the last 60 years. And it did become a very critical issue, which really started, I think, the recognition at the national level right at the end of the Obama administration, his second term. And then, I've been on the board as an alternate and then a board member of the U.S. Semiconductor Industry Association since 2011.
Yep.
I'm actually, I think, the longest serving current member now. If you can believe that. A lot of guys have come and gone and retired.
For better or worse.
I've been, I think so, and some legends, I really got to work with over the years. And so I've been sitting in that, in those meetings and going to DC and involved in this. And so then in 2017 and 2018, the first Trump administration really understood the challenge, the risk of Taiwan.
What is that challenge?
Okay, so the challenge is that, and what obviously has shifted and everyone's seen is that, and just to kind of benchmark it, 2016 when I became CEO, the world was wide open for business.
Yep.
We had a huge team at Marvell in China, big R&D team, big sales force. I was going there once a quarter. The world was open, free trade was everywhere, and you fast forward a couple years and all of a sudden tension, right? And the rivalry emerged and two different sort of points of view on how U.S. and China were going to go forward, and they were no longer completely compatible.
Yep.
And that started creating tension in the system around between the U.S. and China. What are the trade practices? Are they fair or not? Misappropriation of IP. All these concerns that have now become in the public spotlight. These are things we were worried about as the semiconductor industry long before 2016, 2017. And not in a protectionist way. I mean, this has like historically been like a free trader. Global markets drive growth. Every time a big market opens up for semiconductors, everybody wins. But it was to the point where a lot of things were happening that just looked very anti-competitive, and so the government got involved. And part of the reason I bring all this up is, and I had a front row to this. I was the chairman of the U.S. SIA in 2018.
What's SIA?
So that's it's the Semiconductor Industry Association. And it's a pretty cool story. It was formed in the 1980s by the founders by Robert Noyce, who was founder of Intel, Jerry Sanders, from AMD, a bunch of industry legends and icons that were very competitive with each other, big rivalries. And in the 1980s, if you study it, there was a similar set of issues between the U.S. and Japan in terms of semiconductor technology and misappropriation of IP and patent violations and ultimately accusations of dumping, which means, a company would come and sell something below product cost in a region to gain share and cripple the competitor, and using non-market things like subsidies and so forth. And it got so serious in the U.S. that actually Ronald Reagan got involved. And there was tariffs put on Japanese automobiles. And there's a whole kind of defensive strategy that formed. And the U.S. SIA was the one that sort of blew the whistle and said, if we don't do something, this anti-competitive behavior is going to put us out of business. And we can't afford that from a national security standpoint. Our military, there's still a big consumer back then of semiconductor technology. So government got involved, and and I'll bring it back to why it's important today. And so the industry came together and formed this organization called the Semiconductor Industry Association. So it's been around since the 1980s, and it's comprised of CEOs of the largest companies, and you've always got a full board and really, really amazing people. And we all sort of put down our differences, and we're looking out for the industry. And they rotate the chair position. So I got to do that, and my turn was up, in 2018, and it was right at the peak Huawei and peak tweet fest, between the governments, and it was really interesting to watch. But again, we found ourselves in a similar position, potentially anti-competitive behavior. How do we get on a level playing field? And then what's your defensive strategy, and then what's your offensive strategy? And so, you got to do both, right? You can't just sort of complain. You've got to also advance your own agenda. And the CHIPS Act was part of that, right? So the idea was so that was actually conceived during the first administration.
Mm-hmm.
The concept was very well understood, which was we're going to need a way to incentivize companies to, if they've got a decision to make about where to put factory capacity and so forth, put it in the U.S. And then what would that take?
Mm-hmm.
It didn't get enacted and passed, passed by Congress until the Biden administration, but they really built on the work of the first term. And by the way, I suspect if it's going to probably get renamed and maybe recast a little bit. But I think even in the current administration, I think there's very much an understanding that this is still really important, which is an incentive structure to make sure that we are less dependent on foreign manufacturing. And in particular, the hot point, going back to Taiwan, is that Taiwan being in the
less dependent on TSMC in Taiwan.
Exactly.
Why?
Well, because
why is TSMC so important? Why is it so unique?
So they are the undisputed leader at the moment in driving Moore's law and process technology leadership.
Define Moore's law.
Okay, so Moore's law was a concept that was coined by the co-founder, Robert Noyce's co-founder of Intel, named Gordon Moore, who posited concepts around by driving improvements in process technology, wafer process technology, and improving the transistor density of those processes, which would enable more computing power on every successive generation, more power at a lower cost, if you will, because you get more density, more die on a wafer. That you could basically have sort of a doubling effect every few years in terms of your power, performance, and area.
Yep.
And that's continued today. Now it's slowed.
Yep.
But what just to bring it to a point, so TSMC took the lead over Intel in this maybe, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. And Intel has not been able to catch up. And what's happened with these AI applications is even though the technology is very expensive and you're not getting the kind of cost per transistor improvement anymore, the power per millimeter square is still improving like 20-30% per generation. So think about that. So maybe you're not making a chip any cheaper when you go from one process node to the other, but if you can save 20-30% power consumption, and that's direct OpEx for a data center provider. There's a rule of thumb that says basically every watt you can save of power is about $1 of OpEx. So think about that.
Wow.
It's worth something.
Yep.
You might not be able to benefit by getting like a lower cost solution anymore. It's probably going to get more expensive, actually, these chips. But the power savings is so compelling, the economics pencil out. So you need the most bleeding edge, and that's where TSMC outperforms.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't a lot of the money from the CHIPS Act go to Intel?
Yeah, they've received
for this exact reason.
For this exact reason,
because they lost the competitive advantage to TSMC.
Yeah, I think. Well, there's two things. There's the decision on just where you're going to put your manufacturing capacity.
Yep.
And so the CHIPS Act was intended to offset some of because other countries do this. I mean, other countries put big incentives up for you to put wafer fabs because of the reason I mentioned. It uplifts the whole economies and it creates technology that's very unique. So that was really just from a pure like, where are you going to put your capacity? Government's not going to help them catch up.
Yep.
They need to catch up.
Yep.
And that's more their team and their execution and what they need to go do. But TSMC, and I've worked with this company for a long time. They're excellent.
And maybe like if I fast forward to more recently today, why is the stock getting hammered? Like, why are you down 50% in a few months?
It's always fun to speculate on why you're up and why you're down. Yeah, I think in general, if you look, I'll just give you some empirical data.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of ins and outs at any given moment on a company's share price, but for like the last 5 years, if you look at all semiconductor companies, there were 3 companies that always traded in a very similar PE multiple range that were different than everyone else, and that was Marvell, AMD, and NVIDIA. And the three of us have historically for like the last 5-6 years commanded something in the 30 to 35 times range when the average for the overall semiconductor index is maybe 20 or low 20s, which is a little elevated of where it usually was. Usually that index trades at like 17, 18 times. But it's been a bull market. So think of like we are, on every dollar earnings, you're getting quite a bit of an uplift, right, when your PE is higher. And that's because all three companies have grown really nicely and so forth. When we announced our December quarter, our PE and like the data point you gave, it probably went to like 45 times.
When you got to $100 billion market cap.
Something like that.
Yep.
And now with all the global economic concerns, there's been an AI trade-off that's happened.
The tariffs.
Tariffs, you name it. Multiples have come down.
Yep.
So now what was normally 30, 35, shot to 45 is like 18. And by the way, that's kind of where those other companies, they're trading at too.
NVIDIA and AMD.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then, and again, that's not the whole story, but that's just some simple math to like, okay, well, if you take 45 and you cut that like over half, then what happens to your stock price if the E doesn't change?
Yep.
Now, the reality is, I think Mr. Market is also saying, and this is a broad statement for semiconductor companies, hey, there's a lot of risk of recession and what's going to happen in the global economy. So probably Mr. Market's got the E part of it lower in the future. It doesn't quite match the sell side numbers. That's some of what's going on. And our view is we've got to just execute. We got to deliver on the revenue we committed. We got to meet these critical programs for our customers, and we got to make sure we stay 3 steps ahead so that we stay well positioned for this, I think, at least kind of 10-year cycle we're on relative to the AI spend and where the technology is going, and we're just going to power through it. Good year, bad year, we've increased our R&D every year since I've been CEO.
I was reading an article that was saying that according to retail investors, Marvell has the second best AI growth story behind NVIDIA. And the headline of the article was that you were being considered for the Intel CEO job, speaking of Intel. And first of all, whether you were or were not, I'm actually not going to opine on that.
Yeah.
It's just cool that you and the guy that ended up actually taking that Intel job, who's coming on the show, by the way, which
great.
Which I can't wait.
Yeah, he's a good friend. I'm very happy for him. I think Intel is really blessed to have someone of Lip-Bu's capability and character.
And we need this company.
We need this company. Absolutely. It's arguably the most important, U.S. manufacturing and technology company we've had. And I think, with Lip-Bu's leadership and the hardworking folks at Intel and, some degree of grit and determination and hard work.
Yeah. Still must be flattering. Just even to be.
Yeah, I mean.
This is an institution. Like, this is an American icon.
Oh, my God. Absolutely. I mean, we you talk about people like Robert Noyce as an example, or Andy Grove, who was always sort of one of my role models. And I got a chance when I attended the Stanford Executive Program in 2010. Andy was still alive and came and spoke to us, a group of like 80 people or something.
Yeah.
And it was one of the highlights of my life, to be able to, and I got to meet him afterwards and read all the books. And so, I think it's a legendary company. I think I never thought I would wake up one day and see a Bloomberg article with my name in it associated with Intel. And it's flattering to even have that sort of out there. But the reality is, and I've kind of given you some of this background now on the Marvell story. I mean, it's really a special place to me. I came in, there was a lot of issues going on. I left a great job I had. I took a lot of risk, and I'm just so excited with where we are. And somebody asked me about it right around when that thing came out on an earnings call, and I just said, look, I'm not commenting on anything, but I'm all in. On Marvell.
That is what you said. I watched that interview.
I said
and didn't Andy go to? Andy went to Intuit after. Where did Andy go after? Andy Grove. Where did he go?
Oh, well, no, he was the number 3 employee at Intel.
Yeah.
Okay. He wasn't technically a founder, but he was in the top 3 guys. He became CEO probably in like 1988, something like that. Had one of the most incredible runs.
Yeah.
Similar deal, by the way. It was a $3, $4, $5 billion market cap.
Yeah.
I think when he left, it was 150 or something.
Yeah.
He was Time Man of the Year.
Yeah.
He retired from Intel. He had cancer. He fought it. He remained like a emeritus kind of role. And then, but he didn't go. He just stayed like as an advisor to the company and had a bunch of philanthropy. And then he passed away. You know, a few
I should
years
know
ago.
this. We have a long history with Andy at Kleiner Perkins, and actually, like the origins of Kleiner Perkins are because of the semiconductor industry.
Exactly.
And so we, you know, like
you could have some great stories with Lip-Bu, especially if as he's gotten entrenched in the Intel culture and company.
Yeah, we forget like
this
place is called Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
We forget.
I know.
Like that was
It's again, we talk about like the foundational, what's foundational in the economy, what drives growth, what's foundational in technology. It's the Silicon Valley. I mean, it's such an amazing place to have worked for the last 30 years, but I think I take a lot of pride, and I'm like so lucky to be in this industry. I think it's really a kind of a golden era for semis. And
who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Because we've had some bad years too. You know, and there was.
I'm curious. You said that it was like there was some risk when you joined Marvell. I agree with you. Can you quantify what that risk was? Like, what was the state of? Like, we know the market. We know the share price.
Share price was low. But what had happened was, Marvell was founded in 1995. Actually, it's our 30-year anniversary this year.
Congratulations.
And by the way, our little theme of the whole 30-year anniversary we came up with was all in.
There you go.
You know, like, let's go.
There you go.
Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
But so Marvell was founded in 1995. Always had a very strong reputation as a really, really capable engineering company. Products were good, very innovative culture. But they ran into some trouble, and in 2015, there was a whistleblower complaint about by somebody in the finance team that there was revenue ship-aheads happening, and that was kind of declared in front of the company auditor at the time, which was Price Waterhouse, and basically a whole saga ensued after that. And I won't go through all the details and the exact chronology, but basically, the CFO left, the auditor resigned. At some point, the board fired, the two founders, which was a husband and wife, Sahat and Wei Li. They remained on the board. An activist investor came in, which was Starboard Value. They bought a chunk of the company. They said, basically, deal with us or we're going to run a proxy contest. The company settled with Starboard to add new directors. And then in that whole process, and it wasn't clear at that point, I was watching this from the outside going, I what's going on with this company? And then I got a call to interview to be the CEO. And I thought, I'm not sure I want to touch this. But something intrigued me, and I talked to the guy who was the chairman at the time, who just retired a few years ago, Rick Hill, who had been chairman and CEO of Novellus Systems, very successful guy, really well known in the Valley, and we had a lot of shared kind of commonality with people we both knew, and he saw a lot of potential in me, and he sort of assured me, look, this thing's going to be fine. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to get improved here. My current lead director, a guy named Mike Strachan, who took over. So I became chairman after Rick left a few years ago, and then Mike Strachan, who became my lead director. But I remember interviewing with him, and he was a former senior partner at a big audit firm. And I said, hey, how bad is it? Because he was on the board at that time. And he said, I'm not sure I've ever seen any more hair on anything than this one, but it's fixable. And actually, I even talked to Deloitte, who had taken over as the new auditor, and I happen to know the audit partner because she was the partner that was our audit partner at the company I had been at. And she and the senior Deloitte people said, look, we've looked at everything's fine. There's no, so there was bad behavior. They shipped revenue they shouldn't have. it inflated revenues in the short term. It's a problem. There's a shareholder lawsuit we had to go clean up over that. But basically, the company's okay. It needs leadership. It needs leadership. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, there's a potential here. And I kind of was thinking at that time what I told you earlier. I think I could take, it's big enough in terms of the scale. There's enough sort of operating cash flow once I clean it up, and I could probably use this as a platform to reshape what I thought. And I did it.
Yep, it played out.
But it wasn't clear, and everybody was terrified. Can you imagine? We had no financials on file for like three quarters. We had a delisting notice from NASDAQ, and I had no CFO.
That's crazy.
And I just showed up.
And your dad was a CEO?
Yeah. My dad was. He had been a longtime tech executive. He had worked at Apple in their heyday when Steve was there.
And then he became the CEO of a company.
And then he became the CEO of at one point he was a head of Apple USA in kind of the end of his career. And then he left and he became CEO of a modem company.
And at that point, when you were growing up then, like you always aspired to be kind of like a business person like your dad. Like did you have the CEO checkbox in your mind?
Maybe in the back of it. I think I never.
It's fair, by the way, to have that. I think people are shy.
No, but no, I think I never thought I would be capable of it necessarily. But I admired my father, and he was a huge influence on me. In particular, I think we grew the closest actually after I started working, because he was so experienced, and so well, first of all, I lived at home for the first year I was working. My parents were living in Woodside at the time, and we had a space for me to stay above the garage, and that's like, hey, save some money, before you rent your own place. So I see him every night and talk to him every day, and I'd say he got very sick, later, and he got Parkinson's in like 2010 timeframe, maybe a little bit earlier. But there was a period of time where I talked to him almost every day, and it was kind of interesting as somebody who had no experience, and all of a sudden I started like managing people, and then I kind of became like a director level person, and it's almost like along the way there was a new layer to unfold. He didn't expose me to everything he knew, you know what I mean? So as I progressed until I became a CEO, he really helped me, and he helped me in a lot of ways with my impatience and understanding that when you're young and you're ambitious and your career is going like this, a lot of times it takes a while for the management to figure out like actually how good a job you're doing, and the steeper your rate of sort of progress and
more
impact,
flat-footed you catch management.
It takes them longer.
Yeah.
And he says you should be. It's like an honor if you're the lowest paid guy, in any given position you have, because that means you got there early, and you'll eventually they'll all catch up. Don't worry. He couldn't have been more right.
That's a really good lesson.
And I try to tell that to people that have worked for me, because I was that guy. I can't believe I didn't get promoted. I can't believe I didn't get this or that. And he great lessons in leadership, great lessons in management, great lessons in patience and perspective, and how to conduct yourself. It really helped me. It really helped me to have a mentor like that.
Was he around when you became the CEO of Marvell?
Yeah, he was. He passed away in 2019, and he was in pretty significant decline when I became CEO in 2016. But it was actually a very cool story. He was still with it enough so I could have a conversation with him. But it was a little slow and stilted. But it was more. I think his cognitive function was still pretty good, but it was just hard to communicate. And so I started like in July, and I think within a few weeks, I said, "Hey, I'd love to show you the place," And so we had a great sort of couple of people that were helpers for him, to get around, and a lot of mobility issues. So he came over to Marvell on a Saturday, and I met him and William. And I don't know if have you seen Marvell? Have you seen the building or the facility?
I've never been.
Yeah, you should come by and see it. We'll grab a lunch.
I'd love to.
It's actually super impressive. So if you remember a company called 3Com, 3Com had built a huge, beautiful facility right off 237 in Great America, and kind of the networking boom. And basically Marvell bought it in 2005. We own this facility. It's like 1 million square feet. It's acres and acres campus. It's just physically a huge building. Like when people know it, they're like, oh my God, that's like a huge company.
Right.
It almost like helps you punch above your weight in a way.
Totally.
And so he came over and he was just like, you're the CEO of this place? And then I took him around and showed him a whole tour of the facility. I mean, it's huge, but I took him through my building, showed him the boardroom, my office, and we were standing there kind of looking at it. It's right on 237, so you can look out over the bay, and we were standing in the boardroom, I remember, just him and I. And, he was like tearing up. And he's like, I can't believe what you've accomplished. I'm so proud of you.
It's really special.
Very cool.
Very cool.
It was very cool. Yeah. So he did get to see it. And, I think, and it was great because all that advice and impact he made on me, it really made a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. It was really cool.
Yeah.
I was sent an email that you sent to the company. Subject line grit. Obviously, it was catnip for me. And
right.
What year was that email sent? Do you remember when that email was sent?
I think within the last 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. I send one every week.
You do?
Yeah.
One of these?
Yeah.
It's not labeled grit every time, is it?
No.
Okay.
that one's
just
grit.
This one.
And they're not all this detailed, but some of them are. I mean, some of them are, just, I started this on a regular basis during COVID, actually.
Just an update, a kind of brain dump for the company.
Yeah. I mean, during the pandemic, I mean, I always found, even when I was at my prior company and at Marvell, my written communication, like via email, is high impact. It's not the same as a blog. It's not the same as something on the Slack channel or a little audio recording, or I'm doing it.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, for me, with the people that have ever worked with me or for me, email from Matt makes an impact. And there's something about just getting an email.
Yep.
And so they were always well received when I would send one, but I wasn't always super consistent. And some of that too was I was always trying to empower my team and make sure I wasn't trying to, hog all the limelight and make sure that the leadership could communicate with. But when we hit the pandemic, I just decided, and I told my staff and Chris Koopmans, who you met, who's been with me from the beginning, hey, I need your help because I'm gonna have to communicate, like over communicate. And so the first email I sent was like March 20th, 2020.
Yep.
Subject, coronavirus.
And you've kept going ever since.
Kept going ever since.
This email, there's a couple sections that really stood out. The first was that you actually talk about Angela Duckworth's research on grit.
Right.
Which was really the inspiration to this show. I had her on the podcast, which
must have been so cool.
It was like,
no, she nailed it with this.
It's like meeting a hero.
Yeah, no, she nailed it with this work.
It all really crystallized for me this idea when I came to Kleiner, where I realized the best founders that I work with just have this uncanny ability to keep pushing forward,
right,
and getting back up. It's just this. I didn't know how to define it at the time. Obviously, I do now. And what you wrote in the email, quoting her, is she found that even beyond a person's natural talent and IQ, grit was the differentiating factor in those who would succeed, more than the school you went to, standardized test scores, or other metrics commonly associated with long-term success. I have a younger brother who's much younger. He's in high school, and I told him I wasn't like one of the cool kids. Maybe he's more of a cool kid than I was. Okay. And I reflect back, and I was telling him all those kids, doesn't matter, all the smart ones that I remember, all the ones that were the best in school,
right,
all the ones that were really cool. There's almost zero correlation with where they are in the world today.
Correct.
Almost zero.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And this quote reminded me of that. And then you shared your own story where, as a college senior, you would train twice a day and ran up to 90 miles a week for you were in track, obviously.
Yeah, I ran cross country and track.
90 miles a week.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was just like, it was a really cool email to send.
Yeah.
And maybe it was almost, it felt to me like in a time of trial and tribulation, your expression of, we got to go fight. Like, we got to go do this thing.
Exactly.
And you really like...
And I timed it around that. I can't remember exactly what was happening at that time. I don't know if there was I think there was a down quarter right around when I sent it. Like we were coming off the...
Similar to the one that you just had now?
Well, no, this one I guided up.
Right.
That one I guided down. And it was to be expected. It was I think it was a quarter right after... every company went through their reset after the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Semiconductors are volatile. People built up too much. So we had this sort of guide down. Stock got hit. Everyone was a little bummed out. And I'm sort of like, and I always have a queue of these, like of these like very personal, call them Matt notes, that. And so I was saving the grit one. And so I tried to time it with sort of like, hey, we got to power through. You can't just get all mopey dopey because your stock went down and then like the world's coming to an end. It's like this whole AI thing was taken off for us. Like I actually felt very good about once we got through that quarter, what it was going to look like. And I think it's helpful to share experiences that it's okay that you have to grind sometimes and you do get beaten down and it's kind of it's your defining thing though. Like, do you decide to pack it up and give up, or do you just keep going? And the grit thing was really interesting to me because I don't know if I put it in the note, but the other factor that Duckworth talks about is being able to do that, go basically long periods of sustained sort of effort and pain potentially with little to no positive reinforcement. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that either I had innately or I developed over time, but definitely has helped me a lot to get through these big ups and downs that you deal with in your professional life. And certainly as an athlete, both running in college and then I ended up doing triathlons and racing, it's kind of invaluable. And it has a huge correlation. People that do endurance sports or played sports in college or were competitive athletes and their ability to excel and succeed in the business world when times get bad.
Do you still run like that?
No, not as much. So I did. So actually, when my father got sick, which was in 2010, 2011, I was turning 40. I turned 40 in 2012. And I had gone through a period where I was traveling so much and my kids were younger and it was just, everything was busy and I really let my health kind of go. And I sort of just got religion, it was like, hey, I want to do everything I can to prioritize my health. And especially seeing what my dad was going through, not that he was unhealthy and that caused it, but it gets your wake up call. And how much he was battling with physical therapy as the Parkinson's got worse to try to stop the entropy and stop, it was just really hard to watch. So I'm like, this is something I can still get control of. So I did like a little sprint triathlon in 2011 in the summer. It was so painful. I was so out of shape. And I signed up for a half Ironman in March of 2012 in Oceanside, California. And I trained for it. And it was just hellacious. I mean, it was like I'd never done a half Ironman, something that long at that point. When I was in my 20s and 30s before I got out of shape, I was doing more like Olympic distance, but got through it, gutted it out, and then did a bunch of races that summer. And by the end of the summer, like I was actually like pretty fit. Like I'd lost a bunch of weight. I was like in really good shape. I started placing pretty high. And I raced the 2012 season, 2013, 2014, 2015. And my last kind of semi-serious race was Escape from Alcatraz in 2016. And I remember that right after the race, I literally had to go to a hotel I had booked and like, I was like signing my Marvell offer letter. It's like crazy. It was like this final like negotiation over what my severance agreement was or something. I mean, that was like the timing. And I was actually in shape to do an Ironman. So I had the Vine Man on the calendar. It's the one up in Napa. Yeah, it's up in Guerneville or something. Anyway, that was like end of July, and I thought, there's no way I'm doing this. I was in such bad shape over the 2 Ironmans I did. I'm like, I can't take this CEO job, and like 2 weeks later, I'm trying to do some Ironman in a 90-degree weather, and I'm going to be like I can't do it. So then, since I've been CEO, I got to tell you, I've had some fits and starts, and I've tried my best, but the job really, really makes it difficult. So I think I did Oceanside in 2023, and I did it in like 2021 or 2. So I did 2 races, but I'm not.
Do you still work out every day?
I try.
Does the job get too demanding to find time for that?
Well, here's my take on this. So this is where I hold myself accountable. It's an easy excuse to use your job as an excuse. And by the way, the higher you go, the more you get away with it. Well, you're so busy. You're a CEO. I understand that. No, everyone's going to give you sympathy on that. I actually have no sympathy for myself. It's 100%. Well, not 100, because I'm also getting older. I'm like 10 years older now than I was when I was doing this before.
Yeah.
But it's mostly, in my view, a discipline issue and a prioritization issue. And, I was super busy when I was doing all this training. It wasn't like I didn't have an easy job. I was running sales for this company, for Maxa when I was there. I was SVP of a division. I was the number 2 executive. I was battling.
You've
always been busy.
Yeah.
I've been a Section 16 officer of a public company for 19 years.
Right.
Okay, so I've always had stuff.
Yeah.
But I found periods of my life where it was easier to get momentum and get consistent, and I'm still striving to do that.
Well, you mentioned prioritization and discipline. I think prioritization comes first, and then discipline comes. Meaning applying discipline to a lack of priorities isn't very helpful.
Right. Yeah.
But if most important to you is prioritizing your family, then you can have discipline around that. Or if it's your job, then you can have discipline around that.
Right.
Or if it's your health, you can have discipline around that.
Yeah.
I'm doing my first triathlon. I'm doing the Escape from Alcatraz next month.
Oh, you are? Cool.
First one.
Good luck. Have you swum in the bay? Have you acclimatized yourself to that experience?
I went into a pool like a few months ago.
Okay.
And I was like, I barely know how to swim.
Oh boy.
I got goggles gifted to me from my fiance's family because they heard I was going to do it. And this was maybe like my partner's kind of like hint, like you got to get in the pool. I just really didn't want to. And I get in and I'm like, all right, I get to one end of the pool and I'm like turning back and I'm like, I'm exhausted. Like, I think
oh boy. The bay can be, a different world. I've done a bunch of open water swims. There's a race in LA every year I like to do, which is a Hermosa Beach Pier to Manhattan Beach Pier. It's called the Pier to Pier. I did once in 2013. I swam from Asia to Europe, the cross-continental swim on the Bosphorus Strait in Istanbul.
What?
And
how far is that?
7.5 kilometers.
How many miles is that?
With the current. Yeah, it's like 4 miles and change.
It's like
8 kilometers, like 5 miles, so just a little bit less than that.
It's like 3 distances of the Escape from Alcatraz.
Right. Now, it's got a current to it, so if you swim it correctly, it's like a 4+ mile swim. Yeah. They ferry you up and you literally start on the Asia side, get in the water, and then when you finish on the European side. It's pretty cool. I have a whole
that's incredible.
Whole certificate and all that stuff. It was crazy.
I like a few weeks ago I went for a long run and then I was like, all right, I'll just go swim in Aquatic Park. It's just in my running shorts. Jumped in, swam for I don't know, 1 minute.
Yeah.
And I was like,
no, hurting. Yeah.
I'm so cold.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I'm out of here.
Yeah, don't do that.
I'm out of here.
And don't swim after you run either. That's really hard. Really hard. Yeah.
So anyway.
Okay. All right. We'll work on this one.
We got work to do. We got work to do. Thank you for doing this. And I'm so excited to see what's next.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting time to be doing this, right? There's tremendous opportunity out there. I think for the types of technologies, I think the long term is really good. There's a lot of uncertainty in the business community right now on the impact of trade and tariffs and things like that, and what's it going to do. But we look at our customers and what they're asking us to do and what their ambitions are. And quite frankly, we can't go fast enough.
Yep.
I mean, it's a really, really amazing time. And if I just didn't have to look at the equity markets, I'd be saying we're in great shape.
Yep.
And so that'll take care of itself over time. I mean, 3 months ago it was where it was, and now it's where it is. And I'm like the same person and the same guy and the same company.
Yep.
So I love what I do. I think I've got this company to a point where we're really in fighting shape, and we're not a technology laggard. We're not trying to go. We're like pioneering stuff.
Yep.
And I'm fascinated too. I can't wait. And I've got such a capable, incredible team of people at Marvell. I mean, very, very dedicated individuals. No politics, no BS.
Are you hiring?
Great teamwork. We are still hiring. We're hiring in very in very targeted areas.
Like where?
Well, the key, as it turns out, when you do these, especially these large semiconductor chips, you think a lot about, hey, like how much compute power is on it, or like what are the features. But it turns out, and this is something that we're really good at, what ends up defining in a lot of ways the success or failure of your chip is actually what's known as the I/O, or the interconnect. And so there's a lot of specialization that occurs, a specialized engineering capability that's in what's called the analog and mixed signal domain versus the digital domain, which is basically you have a bunch of electrical signals on one of these digital logic circuits, like a big AI processor complex or something. But you've got to get the data on and off the chip at an incredibly high rate. And those interface blocks and circuits are very sensitive. It's a very unique skill set in terms of analog engineers to do it. And the company I was at before was an analog mixed signal company. We did these in a lot of kind of traditional process technologies, not the bleeding edge CMOS, but same issue. And how you kind of hook up all these chips together now, and how you get all the data in between them and on and off, including between the chips. Think about all the memory now that gets stacked around these high performance AI processor chips. How do you optimize that throughput? How do you do it in the smallest possible size so you can have more compute? That whole area is like ripe for innovation, and you really need experienced, talented people. And so we have a very, very strong team there. We continue to double down in that area. Package technology is getting as important kind of as the chip in terms of how you stitch all these together. So there's a few key areas where kind of no matter what. And I think the other one you'd find interesting maybe as we wrap here, but I made a commitment. Actually, it was my first major decision as CEO. When my first day, I was doing like my orientation, and I'm like filling out paperwork, like your address and social security. I'll get with the HR with an HR person, and I said, "Hey, what's going on here with the intern program? Like, how many interns do we have every year? Do we have a program?" And she said, "Oh no, we had one once, but budget got cut and no funds for it." And I'm thinking, this company's spending like $1 billion a year on OpEx on people, and we can't afford some interns? Are you serious? Like, you serious? Like, the place was leaking oil. There was so much like cost to go fix, and yet we couldn't fund the interns. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to have to create the flywheel here, because over time, there's this issue in any industry, but especially semiconductors. It's a pretty mature industry. So if you're not bringing that infusion of talent, you get older, and you age out. People retire, and you haven't passed on the knowledge. So we started with humble beginnings. We've now got a program of like 500 interns that come in every year.
Wow.
We convert if they're going to be a senior. If they've done a good job, we offer them a job by the end of the summer. I think we convert 70, 80%. We get that accept. So they leave Marvell the summer before their senior year. They got a job the next year. And then you add that sort of flywheel we've built, plus just new college hiring. 23% of my new hires last year were out of school, bachelor's, master's, or PhDs directly in. It's awesome. It's a huge infusion of young talent.
That's incredible.
And it's exciting. And it took like it took a long time to build this up. So that one, I'm going to kind of protect at all costs. No matter how bad the year, I never cut that intern program. I always make sure it's world class. Bring in the infusion of new talent we're going to do. And depending on what happens with the overall economy, we can flex. We can decide to hire more or less or control our. We know how to control semiconductor company leadership teams. They're good at controlling expenses. Right. It takes a little time, but we're sort of accustomed to this.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we're really focused kind of on new talent and then some of these key areas where we can really differentiate. But in general, we've staffed up the company really a healthy way. We're able to execute on our projects, so feels good.
We talked about this briefly, but to wrap, when you hear the word grit, what do you think of?
It's a combination of things, right? It's certainly not giving up. That's kind of an obvious one, but it's easy to give up, right? Or lose motivation. It's also about not wallowing in it. Take your time, process it. You had a bad race. You had a bad quarter. You had a bad, your chip didn't work. You had some bad thing happened. Look, at some point, like you're like a CEO like me, and I got like bad stuff happening all the time. I'm like, somebody got to pack down, right? But process it first. Like, just acknowledge it. Like, hey, that sucked. That wasn't good. And realize that for every bad day you have, it could be the worst day you're having. Guess what? Probably within the next 7 days ahead of you, you're going to have a good day. If you're good at what you do and you're competent and capable and you put in the effort, you're going to be fine. But sometimes it feels like the end of the world. And that's where I see people like lose their confidence or spin out of control. And that's why it's important to have mentors, right? If you can find people, like I was lucky to have my dad or like good friends of mine. I remember I did this half Ironman. I was preparing to do my first Ironman. I did the Wildflower Triathlon, the half. It's really hard. It's kind of like doing a 3/4 Ironman also. A horrible race. I blew up on the run, walked a ton of it. I finished. I mean, I was almost in tears, and not because I was like, my time was slow. I was like, I don't think I can do this, Like how am I going to do a whole one and I can't even get through this thing? And my good buddy and training partner was there at the finish. He finished way ahead of me, and he was waiting for me. And I was just kind of getting emotional, and he's like, look at me. You're a badass. You've put in the time. I've been riding with you. You're smoking me. You're killing it in the pool. Like, bad race. Get over it. I mean, having, people around you at those moments, it sounds, but it's like, he was right. Actually, I got stronger after that race. Yeah, I ate it and it was terrible, but guess what? I was so freaking strong after doing that, suffering for 6.5 hours or whatever that one took, or 650. It should have been done an hour earlier. It was one of those horrible, but man, I was so freaking tough after that. And then the next race I did, I felt better. And then by the time I did this first Ironman, which was Ironman Lake Tahoe in 2013, the first year they had it, I was just rearing to go. And by the way, in that race, in the last 4 miles of the run were my fastest 4 miles of the whole marathon. Finished strong. It worked out. But in my darkest moment, I'm like, this sucks. I hate it. And so, I think that says that recognition that the grit part of me got over it and processed it and owned it and was like, okay. And then just the final thing is, it's always like coming back to remembering, like, did I do something wrong to have this bad thing happen to me, or just did it happen? Like, do I need to course correct or not? And I still remember being on that starting line in Lake Tahoe and standing there, and like, by the way, it's 27 degrees at race start. It was nuts. It snowed the day before. Like, the ambient was 27, the water was super cold. And I'm standing there in like my wetsuit, and I'm looking at this like foggy, like Lake Tahoe by Kings Beach. But I remember thinking to myself, I don't actually feel any different, physically than I've like maybe, but I know I did the work. I know I put I know I dialed that training in. And that actually carried me. Every time you're going to get low, it's like, no, I've done the fundamentals. I've put in the time. And it's just interesting to decouple kind of your rational brain from your emotional brain. And I think grit is the ability to fundamentally do that and then reset yourself and power through. Keep going.
Great answer.
Don't give up.
Thank you. I appreciate
Yeah,
you.
I appreciate it too.
Really
It was fun.
fun.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's it for now. If you like the episode, please leave us a review or go back into the archives where we've done more than 200 episodes with some fantastic folks. This podcast is a Kleiner Perkins production, and I'm Juven. Thanks for listening.